Chapter 6. The Significance of Shape and Structure. Developing the Genesis Pattern. The torus. The first shape. Let's look at the first object that comes off the page, the Genesis pattern itself. See Figure 541. If you look at a math book, this Genesis pattern has the minimal amount of lines that can be drawn on a flat surface to delineate the three-dimensional form called a torus. A torus is formed when you rotate the Genesis pattern around its central axis, creating a shape that looks like a donut, but the hole in the middle is infinitely small. A torus, here called a tube torus because this particular one is shaped like an inner tube, Figure 6.1, is unique in that it's able to fold in on itself, turning either inward or outward. No other shape in existence can do this or anything similar. A torus is the first shape that comes out of the completed Genesis pattern and is absolutely unique among all forms in existence. It was Arthur Young who discovered that there are 7 regions on this shape, which are collectively called the 7-color map. You can pick up almost any mathematics book, and if you go to the torus, it'll talk about the 7-color map. There are 7 regions, all the same size, that will exactly fit in the tube torus with nothing left over. Just like on the Genesis pattern, 6 circles going around the 7th, central one take up the entire surface. It's perfect, flawless. In sacred geometry there's something called ratcheting. You take a circle or a line and ratchet it, like when you take a ratchet tool in car mechanics and use it to rotate something a certain distance. For instance, imagine 2 Genesis patterns superimposed on each other. One pattern is fixed. If you rotate the other pattern 30 degrees, you would have 12 spheres around the central one. It would look like this, Figure 6.2, in 2 dimensions. In 3 dimensions it would look like a tube torus. Then if you connect all possible lines in the middle, you get this pattern, Figure 6.3. Ratcheting the 12 spheres once more, this time 15 degrees, so that there are 24 spheres, you would get this pattern, Figure 6.4. This pattern has what is called a transcendental pattern associated with it. What is a transcendental pattern? A transcendental number in mathematics, from my way of looking at it, is a number that comes from another dimension. In that dimension it is probably whole, but when it gets here it does not completely translate into this world. We have a lot of those. One of them, for example, is the phi ratio, which I'm going to talk about later. It's a mathematical proportion that starts out with 1.6180339 and continues forever, meaning you never know what the next digit is going to be, and it never ends. People have let computers run for months without coming to an end. As a simple explanation, that's what a transcendental number is. The shape of the torus is what governs many aspects of our lives. For example, the human heart has 7 muscles that form a torus, and it pumps in the 7 regions shown in the map of the torus. We have embodied all knowledge. The torus is literally around all life forms, all atoms, and all cosmic bodies such as planets, stars, galaxies and so on. It is the primary shape in existence. In the beginning was the Word. I believe that time will reveal that language. Conscious sound, the word will all be revealed in the torus. There are those who believe this to be true now, but only time will tell. The labyrinth as a movement of life force energy. Figure 6.5 is a 7-fold labyrinth. This is found all over the world, everywhere from China to Tibet to England to Ireland to Peru to the American Indians. One was just found in Egypt. You'll find this labyrinth on the floors of many of the churches in Europe. The same form is on stone walls everywhere. It must have been of great importance to ancient mankind. There are 7 regions in it, which relates to the torus and to the beating of the human heart. Later on I'll be talking about the ancient Druid mystery school on the island of Avalon in England. To get to the top of the hill there, you have to walk through this same labyrinth, going back and forth through this motion. While I was in England, I spoke to Richard Feather Anderson, who is an author and an expert on labyrinths, and I learned something. As part of his research, he has people walk through the labyrinth. He's discovered that when you walk through it, you are forced to move through different states of consciousness, giving you a very specific experience. It causes the life force energy to move through the chakras in the following pattern: 3, 2, 1, 4, 7, 6, 5. The energy starts in the third chakra, then goes to the second, then to the first, then it jumps up to the heart, fourth, then into the center of the head to the pineal gland, seventh, then to the front of the head to the pituitary inland, sixth, and then down into the throat, fifth. When you walk this labyrinth, unless you block the experience, you will automatically move through these changes. Even if you don't know about these things, you will go through the experiences anyway. People all over the world have found this to be true. Mr. Anderson believes that if you draw lines, the number of lines indicating which of the 7 paths it is, in the order you walk the path 3, 2, 1, 4, 7, 6, 5, it forms what looks like a cup, figure 6, 6. He feels that this particular labyrinth is related to the shape of the Holy Grail and to its secret knowledge. From my experience, this feels right, but I am keeping an open mind. I don't know about this yet, it may be true. I experimented with this labyrinth on myself, and it is true that those changes did happen for me. However, I was also able to experience these same changes in a different way. I was able to walk a straight line toward the center of the labyrinth and simply make the changes within myself as I cached each place where the turn would be in the labyrinth. I was able to reach the same state without walking through the whole pattern. Remember the labyrinth, I'll come back on it after a while. The Egg of Life, the second shape beyond Genesis. The dark innermost circles show the 6 days of Genesis, figure 6, 7. Once the consciousness projects the first 7 spheres and completes this Genesis pattern, it then continues moving in a rotational pattern from each consecutive innermost place until it completes its second vortex motion as seen by the light outermost circles. That motion in turn completes a 3-dimensional shape you can hold in your hand, which looks like figure 6, 8. If you were to take figure 6, 7 and erase all the lines in the middle and certain other lines, you would see this pattern. The pattern of spheres is like what Spirit would have seen had it moved outside its creation and said, "Aha, I see this thing." It looks like that. The 8th sphere is actually behind these visible spheres. If you were to connect their centers, you would see a cube, figs 6-8a and 6-8b. So what? Who cares? Well, the ancients did, because they were concerned with creation, life and death. They called this cluster of spheres the Egg of Life. I'll soon show you how the Egg of Life is the morphogenetic structure that created your body. Your entire physical existence is dependent on the Egg of Life structure. Everything about you was created through the Egg of Life form, right down to the color of your eyes, the shape of your nose, how long your fingers are and everything else. It's all based on this one form. The third rotation, shape, the fruit of life. The next vortex is the third rotation, figure 6, 9. The spheres in this vortex are centered at the innermost places in the perimeter of the previous round, as shown by the 6 arrows here. So when Spirit rotates in this third vortex, you get the gray rings shown here. Then you notice a new relationship where the 6 circles touch the center one and each other. If you took 7 pennies and pushed them together on a table, they would look like that. This third rotation is an extremely important relationship in the creation of our reality. When you look carefully at the flower of life, you see these 7 circles that touch each other. There are 19 circles in the flower of life, figure 6, 10, and they're surrounded by 2 concentric circles. For some reason, that image is found all over the world. The question is, why did they do that all over the world and stop at 19 circles? It's an infinite grid and could have been stopped anywhere. The only place on the whole planet where I've seen them go out beyond those 19 circles was in China, where they made room divider screens, figure 611. One of the most famous patterns they used on those screens was the flower of life. They made it in a rectangular shape, carrying it all the way out to the edge. But in all others that were found, you would usually see just the flower of life pattern. This is because when the ancient beings realized what the other component was and how important it was, they decided to make it secret. They didn't want people to see this relationship I'm about to show you. It was so sacred and important that they just could not allow it to become common knowledge. It was appropriate at that time, however, now we either use the information or fall further into the darkness. 160 Notice that in the flower of life pattern you see many incomplete circles, which, of course, can also be spheres. Look all around the outer edge of figure 610. If all you did was complete all of these circles, then the secret would unfold. This was the ancients' way of coding the information. The additional circles, spheres that extend beyond the original flower of life pattern inside the large gray ring in figure 612 complete all the incomplete circles at the edge of that pattern. As soon as you complete these spheres, with one more step you'll have the secret. Go to the innermost places of the perimeter, shown by the arrows, and rotate the next vortex. When you do, you get the pattern of 13 circles, shown here by the smaller gray circles, including the center. When it's extracted from the rest of the pattern, it looks like figure 613. This pattern of 13 circles is one of the holiest, most sacred forms in existence. On Earth it's called the fruit of life. It is called the fruit because it is the result, the fruit, from which the fabric of the details of the reality were created. Combining male and female to create Metatron's cube, the first informational system now, all the circles in this pattern are female. And there are 13 ways, with these 13 circles, that you can superimpose male energy, in other words, straight lines. If you superimpose straight lines over this in all 13 ways, you'll come up with 13 patterns that, along with the egg of life and the Torus, create everything in existence. The egg of life, the Torus, and this fruit of life, a total of 3 patterns, create everything in existence without exception. At least I have not been able to find an exception. I'll give you what I've learned. Obviously I cannot show you everything, but I'll show you enough to convince you this is true. I'm going to call these informational systems. There are 13 informational systems associated with the fruit of life pattern. Each system produces a vast and diversified amount of knowledge. I'm going to show you only 4 of those. I think that's enough. The simplest system comes forth by simply connecting all the centers of the circles with straight lines. If you decided to put straight lines on this pattern, probably about 90% of you would think first of connecting all alters. If you do that, you end up with this pattern, figure 614, which is known throughout the universe everywhere as Metatron's cube. It is one of the most important informational systems in the universe, one of the basic creation patterns of existence. The Platonic solids. Anyone who has studied sacred geometry or even regular geometry knows that there are 5 unique shapes, and they are crucial to understanding both sacred and regular geometry. They're called the Platonic solids, figure 615. A Platonic solid has certain characteristics by definition. First of all, its faces are all the same size. For instance, a cube, the most well-known of the Platonic solids, has a square on every face, so all its faces are the same size. Second, the edges of a Platonic solid are all the same length. All edges of a cube are the same length. Third, it has only one size of interior angles between faces. In the case of a cube, this angle is 90 degrees. And fourth, if a Platonic solid is put inside a sphere, of the right size, all the points will touch the surface of the sphere. With that definition, there are only 4 shapes besides the cube, A, that have all of those characteristics. Second, B, is the tetrahedron. Tetra means 4, a polyhedron that has 4 faces, all equilateral triangles, 1 edge length and 1 angle, and all points touch the surface of a sphere. The other simple one is, C, an octahedron. Octa means 8, whose 8 faces are equilateral triangles of the same size, edge length and angle, and all points touch the surface of a sphere. The other 2 Platonic solids are a little more complicated. 1, D, is called an icosahedron, which means it has 20 faces, made of equilateral triangles with the same edge length and angle, and all points touch the surface of a sphere. The last one, E, is called a pentagonal dodecahedron. Dodeca is 12, whose faces are 12 pentagons, 5 sides, with the same edge length and angle, and whose points all touch the surface of a sphere. If you're an engineer or an architect, you have studied these 5 shapes in college, at least cursorily, because they're the basis of structures. Their source, Metatron's cube. If you study sacred geometry, no matter what book you pick up, it shows the 5 Platonic solids, because they are the ABCs of sacred geometry. But when you read all these books, and I've read almost all of them, and ask the experts, where do the Platonic solids come from? What is their source? Almost everyone says they don't know. Well, the 5 Platonic solids come from the first informational system of the fruit of life. Hidden within the lines of Metatron's cube, see figure 6.14, are all 5 of these shapes. When you look at Metatron's cube, you're looking at all 5 Platonic solids at once. In order to see each one better, you have to do that trick again where you erase some of the lines. If you erase all the lines except certain ones, you get this cube, figure 6.16. Can you see the cube? It's actually a cube within a cube. Some of the lines are dotted because they would be behind the front faces. They are invisible when the cube becomes solid. Here's the solid form of the larger cube, figure 6.16a. Make sure you see this one, because they get harder and harder to see as we go, by erasing certain lines and connecting other centers. Figure 6.17, you get 2 superimposed tetrahedrons, which form a star tetrahedron. Like this cube, you actually get 2 star tetrahedrons, one inside the other. Here's the solid form of the larger star tetrahedron, figure 6.17a. Figure 6.18 is an octahedron inside another octahedron, though you're looking at them from a special angle. Figure 6.18a is the solid version of this larger octahedron. Figure 6.19 is one icosahedron inside another, and figure 619a is this solid version of the larger one. It somehow becomes easier if you see it this way. These are 3-dimensional objects coming out of the 13 circles of the fruit of life. This is Sulamith Wolfing's painting of the Christ child inside an icosahedron, figure 620, which is very appropriate, because the icosahedron represents water, as you will see in a moment, and the Christ was baptized in water, the beginning of the new consciousness. This is the 5th and last shape, 2 pentagonal dodecahedrons, one inside the other, figure 621, here showing only the inner dodecahedron for simplicity. Figure 21a is the solid version. As we have seen, all 5 of the Platonic solids can be found in Metatron's cube, figure 622. The missing lines. When I was looking for the final Platonic solid in Metatron's cube, the dodecahedron, it took me over 20 years. After the angels had said, "They're all in there," I started to look, but I could never find the dodecahedron. Finally one day a student said, "Hey, Drunvalo, you forgot some of the lines in Metatron's cube." When he pointed them out, I looked and said, "You're right, I did. I thought I had connected all the centers together, but I had forgotten some of them." No wonder I couldn't find that dodecahedron, because those missing lines defined it. For over 20 years it assumed that I had all the lines when I hadn't. This is one of the great problems in science, believing you have solved a problem. then moving on and using that information to build on. Science is now having to deal with the same kind of problem around falling bodies in a vacuum, for example. It has always been assumed that they fell at the same rate, and much of our higher science is based on this fundamental law. It has been proven wrong, yet science continues using it. A spinning ball falls much faster than a non-spinning one. Someday there will be a scientific day of reckoning. When I was married to Maki, she was also deeply involved in sacred geometry. Her work is very interesting to me because it's female right brain pentagonal energies. She shows how emotions and colors and shapes are all interrelated. Actually, she found the dodecahedron in Metatron's cube before I did. She took it and did something I never would have thought of doing. Metatron's cube, you know, is usually drawn on a flat surface, but it's really a three-dimensional shape. So one day I was holding the three-dimensional shape and trying to find the dodecahedron in there, and Maki said, "Let me look at that thing." She took the three-dimensional shape and rotated it by the phi ratio. Something we've not talked about yet is that the golden mean ratio, also called the phi ratio, is approximately 1.618. Rotating the shape like that was something I would never have thought of doing. After she did that, she cast a shadow through it and got this image, figure 623. Maki originally created this, then gave it to me. It is a center at pentagon A. Then if you take the 5 pentagons coming off of A, pentagons B, and one more pentagon coming off of each of those 5 pentagons C, you have an unfolded dodecahedron. I thought, wow, this is the first time I've ever found any kind of dodecahedron in there. She did that in 3 days. I'd never found it in 20 years. We once spent almost a whole day looking at this drawing. It was exciting, because every single line in this drawing is in a golden mean ratio. And there are 3-dimensional golden mean rectangles all over. There's one at point T, where the 2 diamonds above and below are the top and bottom of a 3-dimensional golden mean rectangle, and the dotted lines are the sides. It's amazing stuff. I said, I don't know what this is, but it's probably important. So we put it aside to consider it another time. Quasi crystals. Later I found out about a brand new science. This new science is going to change the technological world dramatically. Using this new technology, metallurgists believe they will be able to make metal 10 times harder than diamonds, if you can imagine that. That would be incredibly hard. For a long time when they looked into metals, they were using what's called X-ray diffraction to see where the atoms were. I'll show an X-ray diffraction photograph of this shortly. Certain specific patterns came up that revealed there were only certain kinds of atomic structures. They thought it was all there was to learn because that was all they could find. This limited their ability to make metals. Then there was a game going on in Scientific American which was based on Penrose patterns. Roger Penrose was a British mathematician and relativist who wanted to figure out how to lay pentagon-shaped tiles and fully cover a flat surface. You cannot lay only pentagon-shaped tiles on a flat surface, there's no way to make it work. So he came up with 2 diamond shapes that are derivatives of a pentagon, and with those 2 shapes he was able to form lots of different patterns that would fit on a flat surface. It became a game in Scientific American back in the 80s to put these patterns together in new forms, which then led to some metallurgical scientists who were watching this game to suspect something new in physics. Ultimately they discovered a new kind of atomic grid pattern. It was always there, they merely discovered it. These grid patterns are now called quasi crystals. It's a new thing, 1991. They're unraveling what shapes and patterns are possible through metals. Scientists are finding ways to use these shapes and patterns to produce new metal products. And I'll bet that the pattern Maki got out of Metatron's cube is the grandmaster of all, and that any Penrose pattern in existence is derived from it. Why? Because it's all golden mean, it's basic, it came straight out of the basic pattern in Metatron's cube. though it's not my business. At one point I will probably determine if it's really true. I see that instead of using the two Penrose patterns and the pentagon, it uses only one of them and a pentagon. I just thought I'd offer that. What's happening in this new science right now is interesting. As this book begins to unfold, you'll discover that sacred geometry can describe in detail any subject whatsoever. There is not one thing you can pronounce with your mouth that cannot be completely, utterly and totally described, with all possible knowledge, by sacred geometry. And we are making the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom needs experience, yet a more important purpose of this work is to remind you that you have the potential of a living Merkaba field around your body and to teach you how to use it. Il continually comes to places where I digress into all kinds of roots and branches and talk about every subject you can think of. But I'm going to keep coming back on track, because I'm heading in one particular direction, toward the Merkaba, the human light body. I've spent many years studying sacred geometry, and I believe you can know everything there is to be known about any subject whatsoever just by focusing on the geometries behind it. All you need is a compass and a ruler. You don't even need a computer, though it does help. You have all knowledge in you already, and all you have to do is unfold it. You simply learn the map of how spirit moves in the great void, and that's it. You can unravel the mystery of any subject. To summarize, the first informational system comes out of the fruit of life through Metatron's cube. By connecting the centers of all the spheres, you have 5 shapes, really 6, because you have the central sphere, which started the whole thing. So you have 6 primal shapes: the tetrahedron, the cube, octahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron and the sphere. The Platonic solids and the elements. These 6 shapes were considered by the ancient alchemists and great souls like Pythagoras, the father of Greece, to have had an element aspect to them. Figure 624. The tetrahedron was considered fire, the cube was earth, the octahedron was air, the icosahedron was water and the dodecahedron was ether. Ether, prana and tachin energy are the same thing. They extend everywhere and are accessible at any point in space/time/dimension. This is the great secret of zero-point technology, and the sphere is voidness. These 6 elements are the building blocks of the universe. They create the qualities of the universe. In alchemy, they usually talk only about fire, earth, air and water. They seldom discuss ether or prana because it's so sacred. In the Pythagorean school, if you even uttered the word dodecahedron outside the school, they would kill you on the spot. That was how sacred the shape was. They wouldn't even discuss it. 200 years later, when Plato was alive, he would discuss it, but only very carefully. Why? Because the dodecahedron is near the outer edge in your energy field and is the highest form of consciousness. When you get to the 55-foot limit of your energy field, it's a sphere. But the very next shape inside the sphere is the dodecahedron, actually, the dodecahedron/icosahedral relationship. In addition, we live in a big dodecahedron that contains the universe. When your mind reaches out to the end of space and there is an end, there's a dodecahedron enclosed in a sphere. I can say this because the human body is a hologram of the universe and contains the same principles. The 12 constellations of the zodiac fit inside it. The dodecahedron is the terminating point of the geometries, and it's very important. On a microscopic level, the dodecahedron and the icosahedron are the relational parameters of the DNA, the blueprint of all life. You can relate the 3 columns in this figure to the tree of life and to the 3 primary energies of the universe: male, on the left, female, right, and child, center. Or if you go right down to the fabric of the universe, you have the proton on the left, electron on the right and neutron in the center. This central column, which is the creating one, is the child. Remember, we went from an octahedron to a sphere to begin the process out of the void. It is the beginning process of creation, and it is found in the child, or central column. The left column, holding the tetrahedron and the cube, is the male component of consciousness, the left side of the brain. The faces of these polygons are triangles or squares. The center column is the corpus callosum, which links the left and the right sides. The right column, holding the dodecahedron and the icosahedron, is the female component of consciousness. The right side of the brain and the polygon faces are made up of triangles and pentagons. Thus the polygons on the left have 3- and 4-sided faces and the shapes on the right have 3- and 5-sided faces. In terms of the Earth's consciousness, the right column is the missing component. We have created the male, left, side of Earth's consciousness, and what we are doing now is completing the female component for wholeness and balance. The right side is also associated with Christ or unity consciousness. The dodecahedron is the basic form of the Christ consciousness grid around the Earth. The two shapes in the right column are what are called duals of each other, meaning if you connect the centers of the faces of a dodecahedron with straight lines, you get an icosahedron, and if you connect the centers of an icosahedron, you again get a dodecahedron. Many polyhedrons have duals. The Sacred 72. In Dan Winter's book, Heart Math, the DNA molecule is shown to be constructed by the dual relationship of dodecahedrons and icosahedrons. One can also see the DNA molecule as a rotating cube. When you rotate a cube through 72 degrees in a particular pattern, it makes an icosahedron, which is in turn a dual with the dodecahedron. So there's a reciprocal pattern going up the DNA strands, the icosahedron, then the dodecahedron, the icosahedron, continuing back and forth. This rotation through the cube creates the DNA molecule. It has been determined that this is the exact sacred geometry behind the DNA, although there may be further hidden relationships. This 72-degree angle rotating in our DNA connects with the blueprint/purpose of the Great White Brotherhood. As you may know, 72 orders are associated with the Great White Brotherhood. Many people speak of the 72 orders of angels and the Hebrews speak of the 72 names of God. The reason for 72 has to do with the way the Platonic solids are constructed, which is also related to the Christ consciousness grid around the Earth. If you take two tetrahedrons and superimpose them, though in different positions, you get a star tetrahedron, which, from a different view, is nothing but a cube, figure 625. You can see how they're interrelated. In a similar manner, you can also put 5 tetrahedrons together and make an icosahedral cap, figure 626. If you make 12 icosahedral caps and put one on each face of the dodecahedron, it would require 5 by 12, or 60 tetrahedrons to create a dodecahedron. It would be a stellated dodecahedron because a point comes out of the center of each face. Its dual is the 12 points in the center of each face of the dodecahedron, which forms an icosahedron. The 60 tetrahedrons plus the 12 points of the centers equal 72 again, the number of orders associated with the Great White Brotherhood. The Brotherhood actually functions through the physical relationships of this stellated dodecahedron, icosahedron form, which is the basis of the Christ consciousness grid around the world. In other words, the Brotherhood is attempting to bring out the consciousness of the planet's right brain. The original order was the Alpha and Omega order of Melchizedek, which was formed by Melchizedek about 200,200 years ago. Since then 71 other orders have been created. The youngest one is the Brotherhood of the Seven Rays in Peru, Bolivia, the 72nd order. Each of the 72 orders has a life pattern like a sine wave curve, where some of them come into existence for a certain length of time and then disappear for a while. They have biorhythms just as a human body does. The Rosicrucians, for example, are on a 100-year cycle. They come out for 100 years and then disappear totally for 100 years. They literally disappear off the face of the earth. Then 100 years later they're back in the world and functioning for another 100 years. They're all on different cycles, and they're all functioning together for one purpose: to return Christ consciousness back to this planet, to set up this lost feminine aspect of consciousness and bring balance between the left and the right side of the planet's brain. There's another way to look at this that is really extraordinary. When we talk about England, I will get to it. Using bombs, and understanding the basic pattern of creation. Question: when they detonate an atomic bomb, what happens to the elements? As far as the elements are concerned, they are converted into energy and other elements. But there is more to the picture. You have two kinds of bombs, fission and fusion. Fission is splitting matter apart and fusion is putting it together. It's okay to put it together, nobody complains about that. All the known suns in the universe are fusion reactors. I realize what I am about to say is not accepted by science yet, but when you rip matter apart through fission, there's a corresponding outer space location associated with it that is affected as above, so below. In other words, inner space, the microcosm, and outer space, the macrocosm, are connected. This is the reason that fission is illegal throughout the universe. Detonating atomic bombs also creates an enormous imbalance on Earth. For example, when you consider that creation balances earth, air, fire, water and ether, an atomic bomb causes a massive amount of fire in one place. That's an out-of-balance sequence and the earth must respond. If you dumped 80 zillion tons of water on a city, that would also be an out-of-balance situation. Anyway, you have too much air, too much water, too much of anything, it's out of balance. Alchemy is the knowledge of how to keep all these things in balance. If you understand these geometries and know what their relationships are, you can create what you want. The whole idea is to understand the map underneath it all. Remember, the map is the way spirit moves in the void. If you know the underlying map, then you have the knowledge and understanding to co-create with God. Figure 627 shows the interrelationship of all these shapes. Each point connects to the next one, and they all have certain mathematical relationships related to phi ratios. The more you study this, the more these 5 shapes become one. We've only recently begun to remember this ancient science, though they fully understood everything in Egypt, Tibet and India a long time ago. They understood it in Greece, then they forgot for a long time. They remembered it again during the Italian Renaissance, then forgot again. The modern world has almost completely forgotten what shape really means, and we are just now remembering. Crystals. Grounding our learning. Now we're going to take this abstract information that doesn't really seem to apply to us in our everyday lives, and we're going to tie it to our everyday experience. Some of this is not in everyday experience, but we can more or less understand and connect with the subjects. First, I'm going to ground this information to crystals. There are lots of other areas of nature I could use, but it's so obvious in crystals that anybody can see it. I could use viruses or diatomaceous earth. I could show it in a lot of things, but crystals are good because people like them. To begin looking at these crystals, let's first examine this X-ray diffraction pattern, figure 628. When you shoot X-rays down the Z-axis of the atomic matrix of a crystal or metal, you'll get these little dots showing you exactly where the atoms are located. In this case, this is a beryl crystal that actually displays the flower of life pattern. The beryl crystal uses the pattern to arrange its atoms and form this specific crystal. It's really amazing that these little atoms simply line themselves up in space, often with enormous distances between them. These microscopic spaces are relatively vast, like between the stars in the night sky. The atoms perfectly align themselves in cubes and tetrahedrons and all kinds of geometric shapes. Why? This is an X-ray diffraction pattern of a crystal, figure 629. You can see how the atoms have arranged themselves in a cubical design. It's interesting that in all the various forms manifested in the reality, the atoms themselves are spheres. This simple fact has been overlooked by most researchers. But the sphere is the main form that everything came from in the beginning. It is important in understanding creation. The entire fabric of everything in our existence is made up of marbles, all different sizes of spheres. We're sitting on a sphere, the Earth, and spheres are rotating around us. The moon, sun and stars are all spheres. The whole universe, from macrocosm to microcosm, is made up of little spheres in one way or the other. The light waves moving through space are all spheres. We think of a light wave as making waves through space, but it's much more complex. An electrical field spins one way around it and a magnetic field rotates at 90 degrees to the electrical field, and they expand in spherical patterns. Imagine a cube in deep space, and see a bright light flashing from it, going out in all directions, 360 degrees. What do you have? Do you have a cubical light wave energy field moving away from it? At first thought you might say it would be an expanding cube, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But that's not what happens. Light waves move radially away from their source at 186,200 miles a second, so when a light wave moves from the surface of a cube I hold in my hand, in 1 second the light from the face of the cube is already 186,200 miles away. And the wave that moved off a corner of the cube, which is a little farther away from the center than the face, is, in 1 second, 186,200 miles away from the center plus maybe a fraction of an inch. If you could see a fraction of an inch at 186,200 miles, you'd have supervision. And that's only in 1 second. 2 seconds later the form has expanded twice that far, and a minute later it's enormous. So you have a sphere moving away from something that originated as a cube. If the object happens to be really big, then the light wave first tends to take the shape of the object, but it slowly turns into a sphere as it moves away and the object becomes smaller and smaller relative to that light field. So what you have out there is a bunch of light spheres, moving away in all directions and interconnecting with each other. When you see light coming directly toward you, it's white. But if it's not moving directly toward you, it's black. In fact, the entire night sky is filled with brilliant white light, but we see the light only when it's coming toward us. We don't see the light waves that move sideways from us, we just see black. If we could see it all, it would be blinding. Light is everywhere, and there is no place in space where it is not, as far as I know. The sphere is literally everywhere. Electron clouds and molecules. Atoms are also made up of spheres. If you look at the hydrogen atom, the proton is compacted in the center and the electron is way out there orbiting the proton. If the proton were the size of a golf ball, the electron would be about a football field away, and that electron is moving real fast. I remember that when I was studying physics, I could not believe that the little electron, which is a pinpoint you cannot even see, is moving around and around in some microscopic space at 9/10 the speed of light. This means that the electron travels around the proton about 170,000 miles every second, around something you can't even see. My mind was totally boggled. I went home and lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. That was just inconceivable to me. The little electron moves around so fast that it appears as a cloud. In fact, they call it an electron cloud. There's only one electron, but it's moving so fast that it appears to make a sphere around the central proton. It's like a television screen, where there's only one electron beam moving across that screen at any one moment, moving carefully and intentionally down the screen, zigzagging back and forth until it gets all the way down to the bottom, then starts all over again. It's doing this so fast that you see a very believable image. So spheres are the primary component of the reality we're experiencing. Although an electron orbit describes a sphere, it can also describe other patterns, such as a figure 8. Physicists have been able to calculate this only for hydrogen, and so far they're just guessing about the rest. An atom is called an ion if it has too many or too few electrons and has either a positive or a negative charge. So the primary characteristics of an atom are how big it is and what its charge is, figure 630. These two main factors determine whether or not different atoms will fit together into molecules. There are other subtle factors involved, but size and charge are primary. Figure 631 shows how atoms combine. These were the primary patterns known for a long time, until they figured out about quasi crystals. The atoms on this chart have several varieties. A shows a linear pattern with a smaller atom in the middle. B shows a triangular pattern of 3 with a little atom in the middle. The little atom can literally either be there or not be there. C shows a tetrahedral pattern, with one atom in the middle, or not. D shows an octahedral pattern, and E shows a cubical pattern. Now, because of new scientific information, we can add icosahedral and dodecahedral patterns. Atoms always line up in specific ways when they crystallize, figure 632. They form into, say, a cube, and then that cube puts another cube next to itself and another cube next to it, and soon you get one cube connected to another, connected in turn to another cube and so on, forming what is called a lattice. There are all kinds of ways that atoms can join. The resulting molecules are always associated with sacred geometry and the 5 Platonic solids. It makes you wonder how those little atoms know to go only into those certain places, especially when they get very, very complex. Even when you get into this complicated molecule, figure 633, and break it down, you see the shapes in it, and they always revert to one of the 5 Platonic solids. It doesn't matter what the structure is. No matter what you call it, metal, crystal, anything else, it will always come down to one of these original 5 shapes. I'll show you more examples as we get further into this. The 6 categories of crystals. Now we'll get into crystals. There are at least 100,000 different kinds of crystals. If you've ever been to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This show takes over 8 or 10 hotels, with every room in the multi-story hotels filled with crystals. In the auditorium you'll see all the gems. There are lots and lots and lots of different kinds of crystals. And more are being found. Almost every year there are 8, 9, 10 brand new crystals never known before. But no matter how many crystals there are, they can all be put into 6 categories: isometric, tetragonal, hexagonal, orthorhombic, monoclinic and triclinic, figure 634. And all 6 of those systems used for organizing all known crystals are derived from the cube, one of the Platonic solids. It's a matter of which angle you are viewing the cube from: the square, hexagonal or rectangular view, as opposed to the normal 90 cubic angle. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting, at least for me, hopefully, for you, too. These are fluorite crystals, figure 635A and B. Fluorite is found in just about any conceivable color you can think of, including clear. There are 2 primary fluorite mines in the world, one is in the United States and the other in China. Fluorite is found with 2 totally different atomic structures. One is octahedral and the other cubical. This purple fluorite crystal is made up of tiny cubes all clumped together. They were not cut that way. They grew that way. The clear fluorite crystal is an actual octahedron. It was not cut that way, but in this case it didn't grow that way, either. It usually comes in sheets, and if you drop it or strike it, it breaks along the weakest bonds, which happen to be octahedral, because the atoms are in an octahedral lattice. If I were to drop it onto a hard surface, it would break into a whole bunch of baby octahedrons. But what's especially interesting is that it's been discovered that fluorite will grow from one shape to the other, from cubical to octahedral and back again. In its natural state, given enough time, a cubical crystal will someday become octahedral. And given enough time, an octahedral fluorite crystal will become cubical. They oscillate over time, first becoming one, then the other, back and forth over very long periods of time. Geologists have found some fluorite crystals in the process of change, but they could not understand how they oscillated like that. Truncating polyhedrons. One geology book tried to explain how fluorite changes like this, figure 636. At the bottom right you see a cube. If you were to cut off its corners by the same amount, it's called truncating. You can truncate any polyhedron, meaning any of these many-sided shapes. When you do that, in this case a cube, you can cut off either the commas, the edges or the faces, as long as you cut them all the same. If you truncate this cube by cutting the corners at 45 degrees all the way around, you get the next shape to its left. If you truncate it again in exactly the same way, you come up with the next shape to the left. If you do it once more, you get an octahedron, on the far left. You can go back the other way, truncating the commas of the octahedron, and come back through the whole procedure until it turns back into a cube. This was the geology book's attempt to explain how in the heck fluorite changes shapes like that. The book actually explains only how this change could take place geometrically, but in truth, something far more amazing takes place when fluorite changes. The ions actually rotate and expand or contract to become a different lattice. It's much more complex than the book shows. This is another fluorite crystal, figure 637, one of my own. It's very big, about 4 inches on a side. You don't often see them this big anymore. In case you can't quite see it, it comes up to a point in the center. Somebody put this in a window where the sunlight hit it, and because the bonds in fluorite are so weak, when the sunlight struck it, it cracked along the octahedral atomic lines, of course. In the upper right corner of figure 638 is a cube. The cube to its left is truncated along its edges. Truncated twice more, the done thing turned into a dodecahedron. This is an example of the cube, dodecahedron in crystals. In figure 639 the upper crystal is a pyrite cube. It grew that way, no one cut it. There's a huge one like this in Silverado, Colorado, about 6 feet square, I believe. They simply took it out of the earth as a perfect cube. This little pyrite is square on 2 ends, rectangular on the sides. The lower crystal is a tiny pyrite dodecahedron cluster. Some of them are almost perfect and it grew this way in Peru. If this little slab had been left in the earth long enough, those little dodecahedrons would turn into cubes, and over enough time after that, they would turn back into dodecahedrons. If you take the dodecahedron, bottom left in figure 638, and truncate its points, it turns into an icosahedron, next to it on the right. If you keep truncating the points, it turns into an octahedron. I could go on with this truncating business for a long time. There are thousands of ways to do it. Each pattern and crystal, no matter how complex it gets, will turn into one of the 5 Platonic solids if you truncate it just right, showing the innate nature of the 5 Platonic solids in crystal structure. A little side note, if you look inside a point-truncated tetrahedron made of glass or crystal or even mirrors, it will reflect the light. The mirrored reflection inside it is a perfect icosahedron. Check it out. You can go on and on with this. You'll see some that look really strange, like they couldn't possibly be based on anything logical, but all you have to do is a little geometry, and every time you will find out that it's derived from one of the 5 Platonic solids. There are no known exceptions. No matter what the crystal pattern is, it's always based on a Platonic solid. Crystal structures are a function of the 5 Platonic solids that came out of the fruit of life, out of Metatron's cube. If you want to see more of these crystals, you can find plenty in the Rocks and Minerals book by Charles A. Sorrell. There's one more set I want to talk about that refers back to figure 638, different truncating possibilities. When you truncate an octahedron by cutting off all the corners so that they are 90 to each other, shown at A on the figure, it makes the shape on its left. If you were to draw it on a flat surface, it would be a square with a diamond in the middle, figure 640. This pattern happens to be related to our consciousness, to the very nature of who we are. Buckminster-Fuller's cube equilibrium. This is what that shape looks like three-dimensionally, figure 641. It's called a cuboctahedron or vector equilibrium. You can see that it's originally a cube, but if the angle at point A were continued upward, it would form an octahedron. It's both at once, an octahedron and a cube. It doesn't know which one it is, it's somewhere in the middle. When Buckminster Fuller found this polyhedron, he became almost preoccupied with it. He thought that the cuboctahedron was paramount, the greatest shape that ever was in creation, because it does something that no other known shape does. It was so important to him that he gave it a brand new name, the vector equilibrium. He discovered that this shape, through different rotational patterns, turns into all 5 of the Platonic solids. This one shape seems to have them all contained within itself, figure 642. If you find this interesting, buy this toy, see the reference section, and play with it. It will answer all your questions if you let it. Deep inside a sesame seed. Other people have also studied the cuboctahedron. Is anybody familiar with a man named D. Roald Langham? Not too many people know of him. He has been pretty quiet during his life. His work is called Geneza, if you want to study it. I really respect him. First of all, he was a botanist who single-handedly saved South America during World War II. They were starving to death, and he created a corn that grew like a weed. You just threw it on the ground, and it grew almost without water. It was a great service to the South American continent. Later he studied the sesame seed, and when he explored deep inside it, he found a cube. In fact, when you get inside any seed, you'll find little geometrical shapes that are associated with the Platonic solids, primarily the cube. D. Roald Langham found 13 rays that came out of the sesame seed's cube. Carrying those studies further, he discovered that the same energy fields that are in plant seeds also exist around the human body, which is what we will eventually talk about. But he focused on the cuboctahedron, which is interconnected with the fields around the body. We will be discussing that, though my instructions are to focus on another shape, the star tetrahedron. We have a star tetrahedral field around our bodies, which is also around seeds, but which makes a series of geometrical progressions that are different from the cuboctahedron, vector equilibrium. Langham made a series of what you might call sacred dances, in Sufi talk, in which you move and connect with all the points in your field in such a way that you become aware of them. It's really good information. Figure 643 shows some of the three-dimensional forms of the polyhedrons we have been talking about. The one at A is the cuboctahedron we just discussed, the one at B is the rhombic dodecahedron. The latter is important because it's the dual of the cuboctahedron. If you connect the centers of the cuboctahedron, you get the rhombic dodecahedron, and vice versa. Figure 644 shows how the internal geometries of the atoms are reflected in the angles of these crystals. We've seen that already, in terms of the crystals being cubes, octahedrons and other forms. The 26 shapes. From my way of thinking, the first 5 Platonic solids are the first 5 notes of the pentatonic scale. The octave has 7 notes. The last 2 corresponding to the cuboctahedron, A, and the rhombic dodecahedron, B, shown in figure 643. 5 additional shapes form the chromatic scale, and there's a 13th one, the return. Thus there are 13 polyhedrons that form the chromatic scale of music. From those 13, 13 more are formed that are the same, only stellated, to total 26 shapes 2 octaves within each other. In terms of form, those 26 shapes are the key to all the harmonics of the reality. We don't need to get into such complexity here, But it just goes on and on and on. Some of you may know of Royal Rife, the man who was trying to cure cancer through electromagnetic fields, EMF, such as light, which I believe is absolutely possible and has been done. Rife knew of 7 of the 13, or possibly 26, frequencies. The ones he published were incorrect, but he purposely did that. Those he published cause cancer, though if they're shifted slightly in a certain mathematical way, they return to the original frequencies, and each frequency destroys most or all of a specific virus or bacterium. However, Rife only knew part of the equation. If he had known the sacred geometry we now know, he could have come up with all 26 forms and eliminated any virus in existence. It doesn't matter how many AIDS viruses there are, there's nothing to finding a solution. There are a maximum of 26 templates, and the right frequencies will eliminate every single virus, or bacterium. Because every virus is a polyhedron structurally, they look just like the polyhedrons in Figure 643. There are various ways you can deal with them. You can either blow them up through certain harmonics of EMF, or you can match them, Figure 645. If you can match them, you can couple with them, much like an antivirus does. Or you can simply make them non-existent by creating a waveform that's a mirror image of what they are. There are lots of ways to work with AIDS, but one primary key is understanding that there are a maximum of 26 geometries associated with it. Crystallized water ice crystals form these hexagonal patterns we call snowflakes, Figure 646. You can see the relationship to the flower of life. Over and over and over again you will find this relationship of 3D patterns to the geometries that come out of this one central flower of life pattern. The periodic table. This is an interesting version of the periodic table of the elements, Figure 647, because it shows that every element, with a few exceptions that cannot be determined because they will not crystallize, is related to the cube. One of these few exceptions is fluorine, because fluorine reacts with almost nothing. It's one of the most inert gases. But on almost all the other elements we find this cubical relationship, except the fourth-dimensional atoms that fall outside the natural table of elements and those that are synthetic or man-made. They don't happen naturally in nature. Each atomic element has an associated crystalline structure. In every single case scientists have found that the different crystalline structures associated with atoms can be reduced to the structure of a cube. You might have noticed that the cube seems to be more important than the other polygons. For example, crystals are divided into 6 different categories, but the cube is the basis of all of them. In the Bible it says that the throne of God is so many cubits in different directions. When you make one, it's a cube. The pharaohs in Egypt sat on a cube. What the heck 15 it about the cube? The key. The cube and the sphere. Well, the cube is different from the other Platonic solids because it has one characteristic the others do not except for the sphere, which also has the same characteristic. Both the sphere and the cube can perfectly contain the other 4 Platonic solids and each other symmetrically, by their surface, assuming you have the right sizes. The cube is the only Platonic solid with this special characteristic. You can take a sphere, slip it inside a cube, and it will touch the 6 faces perfectly and symmetrically. And a tetrahedron will slide right down one of the axes and become the diagonals of the cube, fitting perfectly and symmetrically. A star tetrahedron will also fit perfectly inside a cube. The octahedron is actually the dual of the cube. If you connect the centers of the adjacent cube faces, you get an octahedron. That one is easy. When you get to the last 2 Platonic solids, it doesn't look like they could fit symmetrically into the cube and the sphere, but they do. It is a little difficult to show here, but you can see for yourself. Using a real model, just find where both the icosahedron and the dodecahedron have 6 edges in the planes of the cube, and you have it. You will see how they slide into the faces of the cube, Figure 648. you can see how the other four Platonic solids fit symmetrically into the cube and the sphere. What is important here is that only the sphere and the cube have this capability. The cube is the father, the most important male form. The sphere is the mother, the most important female form. So in the entire reality, the sphere and the cube are the two most important forms and will almost always dominate when it comes to primary relationships in creation. It was for this reason that a man named Walter Russell did some work long ago that was absolutely phenomenal. I don't believe he knew anything about sacred geometry. He was sacred geometry illiterate, to my knowledge. Yet he intuitively grasped it in his mind. And when the images were happening in his mind, he chose the cube and the sphere as the main geometries to talk about what he understood. And because he chose those two forms and not others, he was able to go far. If he had selected any others, he would have made a big mistake and would have been unable to do the work he did. Crystals are alive. This amplifies my thoughts about crystals being alive. Before I taught this course, I used to give courses on crystals, back in the early or mid-80s, I guess. And I discovered not through giving the courses, but through my actual interaction with the crystals themselves that these crystals are alive. They are living and conscious. I was able to communicate with them, and they communicated with me. Through these interchanges I found out all kinds of things. The more I lived with them and learned how to connect with them, the more I discovered just how conscious they were. It was one of the most interesting awakenings in my life. One time I was in San Francisco giving a course to about 30 people, and I was saying this very thing: these guys are alive. Everybody was listening and saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. Then one person said, prove it. I said, okay. Then I quickly thought up something to do. I gave everybody a piece of paper and a pencil, and said, we're going to grab a crystal at random. I selected a crystal that nobody had seen, actually took one and kept it hidden. We didn't let anybody see it. Then I said, now, nobody gets to examine this crystal or even see what it is. You're just going to put it on your forehead, and you have 1 second, that's it. You're going to ask the question, where are you from? The very first word that comes in, write it on a piece of paper and fold it up so no one sees it. Just take the crystal, ask the question, hand it to the next person, then write down what you get. That was the only way I could think of to prove it. We passed that crystal around to 30 people, and everybody wrote down an answer. Then we looked to see what we received. And every single person had Brazil written down. What are the odds of that? Crystals have phenomenal abilities. They affect people in all kinds of ways. Katrina Raphael has written a lot about this in her books, but many other people have also learned about the abilities of crystals over the years. Many ancient beings and civilizations were also well aware of this. Crystals don't just happen as the result of a chemical reaction either, they grow. When you study how crystals are formed, they grow very much like people in lots of ways. An aerial view of your energy field, shown back in Figure 232, is in part simply the flower of life pattern, which is hexagonal in nature. Our fields grow hexagonally, just as crystals do. Though the silicon molecule is a tetrahedron, when it forms quartz it links with another silicon tetrahedron to form a cube. Then it throws out a long line of little star tetrahedrons or cubes to form a row. Then the row begins to spin, changing direction exactly at 60 degrees to form a hexagon, the same structure seen around the human body from above. Crystals have genders. They're either male or female or both. If you know what to look for, you can look at a crystal and see which way it's rotating. Find the lowest window or face and look to see where the next face is. If it is on the left, then it is rotating clockwise, and that crystal is female. If it is on the right, then it is rotating counterclockwise, and it is male. If there are faces on both sides at just about the same height, you should see two spirals moving around this crystal in opposite directions, and that crystal would be bisexual. Often two crystals are joined at the base and wrap somewhat around each other. These are called twinned crystals, and these are almost always male and female. It's rare for them to do it differently. The future silicon-carbon evolutionary leap. Here's an image I love to talk about. The sixth element on the periodic table is carbon. It is the most important element as far as we're concerned, because it's us. It makes up organic chemistry. It is the element that makes our bodies possible. We have been told that carbon is the only living atom on the periodic table, that only organic chemistry produces life, nothing else. But that's definitely not true. They suspected this as far back as the 50s when scientists began to study these things. They realized that silicon, which is directly below carbon on the chart, 1 octave apart, also exhibits the principles of life. There appears to be no difference. Figure 649 shows how silicon forms certain chains and patterns. These are only a few. Silicon makes endless patterns, and it will react chemically with almost anything that comes near and form something with it. Carbon has the same ability, making endless forms and chains and patterns and reacting chemically with almost anything nearby. This is the primary characteristic that makes carbon a living atom. On a chemical level, it appears that there should also be silicon life forms. After this was discovered, several science fiction movies were made in the 50s based on the belief that there might be silicon life forms on other planets. There were a bunch of scary movies about living crystalline structures. They didn't know when they were making those movies that there really are silicon life forms right here on this planet. Some of these were recently found several miles deep in crevices in the ocean. Silicon sponges were found, live sponges that grow and reproduce, demonstrating all the principles of life, and with not a single carbon atom in their bodies. Here we are, sitting on Earth, which is over 7,000 miles in diameter. Its crust, 30 to 50 miles thick, is, like an eggshell, made up of 25% silicon, but because silicon reacts with just about anything, the crust is actually 87% silicon compounds. That means that the Earth's crust is almost pure crystal, 30 to 50 miles deep. So we're on this huge crystal ball floating through space at 17 miles a second, totally oblivious of the connectedness of carbon life with silicon life. It would seem that silicon and carbon must have a very special relationship. We carbon-based beings are living on a crystal ball made of silicon, our crystal planet, looking for life outside ourselves in outer space. Perhaps we should look toward our feet. Now, think about computers and the modern world. We're making computers that are performing all kinds of incredible things. The computer is rapidly moving humankind into a new experience of life on Earth. What are computers made of? Silicon. And what is the computer industry trying to do as fast as it can? Make self-aware computers. We're very close to accomplishing this, if we haven't already. I feel sure that very soon we will have self-aware computers. So here we are, carbon-based life forms creating silicon-based life forms, and we're interacting with each other. When we have self-aware silicon-based computers, nothing will ever be the same again. We're going to have two different life forms, components of the Earth connecting with each other, and the speed with which we will evolve at that point, aside from everything else, is going to be very, very fast, faster than anything we would normally expect. I believe that this will come true in this lifetime.